All right, guys. So in the previous video, we discussed direct versus indirect at the very end of my video. I want to give you a little illustration of what that means, right? So indirect, we looked at a lot when we talked about Britain, and we talked about the corruption or the bribery that goes on between the British and the princes within those local areas. I want to look a little bit more today at the direct type of leadership. So for the French who were in Algeria, let me pull up. So Algeria is here in North Africa. It's controlled by the French. You can see as early as the 1870s, and even going back further, there had been a connection, right? France. This is not in this map, but France is what, 80 miles north of Algeria. So they're very close to one another across the Mediterranean Sea. So the French have had connections with Algeria for a really long time. And beginning as early as the 1870s, there had been a desire by the French government to establish an Algerian fighting force and Algerian troops to work within Africa, but they would be paid as if they were French soldiers. So beginning all the way back in the 1830s, even, the Algerians were seen as a viable option to sort of keep the French citizens from dying. So you can see why the reasoning is here, right? So if you read this, this is a letter from a French minister giving a proposal as to why he believed that there should be the use of Algerian troops to defend French territory. So here's some of the, firstly, so he's giving reasons here. I believe that the considerable losses we have suffered in Algeria, Madagascar, and Senegal, 3 French territories, may be attributed to 2 causes: the intemperate climate, and secondly, the lack of those foodstuffs. Right, so we're losing a lot of people here because of these basic reasons. So then, there's a reason here to start looking for auxiliary troops, and that's what he calls them. The idea here is to develop an Algerian troop that could be used in Africa as necessary. Now, why is this important? Because what he's looking to do here is he's trying to pay the soldiers as the same as the French soldiers. They would set up an officer corps, and they would be trained to be given French orders and things like that. They would be given titles and honors within the French military. These Algerian troops, were supposed to be as if they were French troops. So it's an interesting event that goes on here, right? Where you're conquering a place, but you're using the people to conquer the place. And what's important to see here is that they're doing it as French military, right? This is, kind of like the sepoys in India, except the sepoys in India were never supposed to be assimilated and become British. These French Algerian soldiers were supposed to be really French people. They learn to speak French, it says here. They are brought to France to learn their customs. This is what we call assimilation. They are assimilating, so the word assimilation means to blend in or blend about, right? So the Algerians are being assimilated into French culture. In Algeria today, there's a huge connection between the people of Algeria and the people of France. One of my favorite statistics, I believe it was the 2010 World Cup, or maybe the 2008 World Cup, Soccer World Cup. Something like 20 of the 25 players on the Algerian team were French, right? So the idea here was if you couldn't make the French team, but you wanted to play soccer, you went across the Mediterranean Sea and played where your great-grandparents may have come from in Algeria. So the next document here refers to the Congo, which was at the end of the last video. So George Washington William was a was a British guy who traveled around the Congo Free State, owned by the king, King Leopold II. And then he writes an open letter to him, discussing sort of the troubles that he had seen in the Congo and the things that had made him sort of upset about it. So in this first paragraph here, he's sort of criticizing the king, and sort of the king was talking about how he's taken adoptive care over, and he's going to be, again, this benevolent, paternal influence on the region. That was his reasoning, at least, right? And also, I would draw your attention to the date, right? The date here is really early. The Berlin Conference was only 5 years before this, and here we are. Only 5 years later, and people are starting to criticize Leopold. Now, you can read these things on your own, but then he goes, and you can look at the larger document, and maybe I don't have the link here, but maybe I'll include the link here. He talks about sort of the big problems that are going on, right? He says, so you control a territory of 1.5 million square miles, all these different navigable miles, but you don't treat people correctly, right? You're cutting off the heads of the captured warriors. You're really treating people very brutally and barbarically. You've set up all these different control posts and officers, but the black soldiers, many of whom were slaves, exercise the power of life and death, right? Again, you've deputized, and one of the things he's criticizing here is that for many, there are people who are working and they're being brutally treated. But then under the Belgian leadership, there's a group of white people who are in charge of the colony. But below them are basically people who are African, who are brutal to their fellow African people. So he's saying you're using some military force, but you're basically making people fight against themselves. And the final thing here that I have here, which is not the final one on there, you can go and look at the larger document. Again, I'll attach that here. I'll attach that maybe up at the top here in a few moments. You're being excessively cruel to its prisoners, right? You're being awful to the people who are under your control. So please answer the questions, and that'll be that. And then in terms of the other portion, right, I'm asking you to read a couple of pages and then answer a couple of questions in the true margin review style, right? A thesis and a couple of points. All right, good luck, guys. Take care.